Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show. Today, bringing another really awesome guest involved in creating a better tomorrow for many people out there, getting some really unique themes today that we don't normally touch on, but very excited to be joined today by Pedro Sanchez de Lozada, who is co-founder and chief executive officer of a company called Canid. They are a company focused on modernizing basically every aspect of providing vaccines in pediatrics, from operations to finance to helping maximize care, ultimately focusing on all the details of executing vaccine programs so the pediatricians can focus on the one thing that's most important, and that's the children. Pedro is a seasoned CEO. He has a background, various experiences in early stage startup development, operations, marketing, at many venture-backed companies, including roles at Merlin as director of marketing, head of launch in Washington, D.C. at Rinse, growth engineer at Koding, a business development and marketing professional at Udemy, and vice president of marketing at Road to Innovative Social Entrepreneurship. Pedro has also served, interestingly, as curator of TEDx University of Chicago, as founder of LogiMD, and was a fellow at the On Deck organization. Pedro did his bachelor's in economics from the University of Chicago, and I'm looking forward to really getting into a lot of interesting themes here. Pedro Sanchez de Lozada, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Ira.
Great having you. Really great having you. I'm very interested in getting into everything we've been talking about. Before we even touch on vaccines, would love to, as I typically do, hand things over to you for a little bit, just to further introduce you, because, you know, as I rattled off those companies at the beginning, you know, education startups, human resource, medical, even a laundry.
Done a little bit of it all, huh?
Yeah. Tell us about yourself. I mean, you got an awesome background. To really tell us the background story here before we even get into that.
So I guess I'll start at the very beginning, and you know, I came to the U.S. 17 years ago to study economics at UChicago. And you know, while I was there and I was building my career in kind of the economist business side of the world, I was really excited about the intersection of technology and business. And that's when I joined Udemy. Udemy is an online education platform that you know, back in the day was the one of the first to kind of bring education online as in a way that's accessible to everybody. And the key difference between Udemy and other organizations that brought education online is that we weren't working with the Yales and the Harvards of the world. We were working with people like you and me who might have something to teach to the world and who might have want to have a platform to do so online. And that was really exciting to me because we kind of created a category of small business existing already and brought them to a new stage, right? Where these educators might in the past, you know, have been in small classrooms and maybe done courses and maybe been tutors and whatnot. All of a sudden they have a global stage, a global marketing presence, and the ability to do what they do best, educate people in a way that's scalable and has the technology backing behind it. But the thing that I loved the most about it was this idea that, like, if you give people the right tools, you can generate a small business that is that is incredible and has this large impact on the world, and is also kind of financially sustainable and works really well. And I've used that thread throughout my career. I then left that company and I joined Rinse. Rinse is a dry cleaning and laundry, and you mentioned that before. That basically we did the same with a dry cleaner and laundry, right? Where the dry cleaner is an expert in cleaning clothes and making sure that they're taken care of properly. What they might not be an expert in is delivery, online app development, things that are required in the modern world, maybe to reach a broader base of customers, operational and financial management. And so basically, Rinse was kind of a layer on top of that that would help these small businesses reach that scale. And as I left that and we grew that all over the country, ended up also being at Merlin. Merlin was a high velocity recruiting platform for restaurants and retail stores. So again, with that same idea, right? A restaurant, you have a bartender that might have left their role today, and now you have to replace them. And so having that ability to do that quickly and efficiently in a way that was helpful to the business was really, really important. And grew that for about 3 years until we got acquired. And this is kind of where my career took a turn to the medical world. Just a little bit of my background, like I'm talking a little bit about my career, but from a family perspective, I come from a family of pediatricians and medical doctors. And my mom and my uncle are both pediatricians. And, I grew up with pediatrics in the dinner table, right? I grew up with seeing my mom, who was focused on taking care of patients, who wanted to do what's best for them, and sometimes making hard decisions in terms of like what her financials looked like versus what was best for the patient. And unfortunately, some of those conversations did come up, and that was the reality of what we were dealing with. And then as I got older and studied economics and got into these ideas of small business and business improvement, I realized that I had something that she didn't have, which is that I had a training in understanding how to make sustainable businesses work. And when the pandemic hit, especially, we kind of put our heads together and we said, hey, look, like the pandemic is happening. We need to get digital. We need to understand what are the things that are holding us back. We need to understand why do we have investments in inventory, and we'll get back to that, but that's kind of the threat of vaccines. And then we need to understand, how can we modernize to the new experience that patient requires, as they might be scared to go outside, might be scared to deal with preventative care, because preventative care obviously is kind of the last thing you want to do when the pandemic is happening, right? And all of that became really big themes. And so joined forces with her, joined forces with my uncle as well, to help them kind of survive in a way, or like optimize their business throughout the pandemic. And while I was doing that, I realized the need for ideas like mine. And basically, in a way, we were kind of, I was thinking about this, right? This concept of somebody who runs a business at the end of the day, who wants to do everything that they can for their patients and wants to be able to focus on that, does not want to be worried about, supply chain management and financial management and how do you make sure that insurance companies pay attention to you and whatever, right? All these other things that are unfortunately a part of the medical field today, pretty prominently so, right? And so that was really exciting to me, right? And so in a way, the concept behind what we're trying to build is to say, hey, how do we take some of these ideas? How do we scale them out to pediatrics? How do we give these tools to people who want to take care of kids and who want to focus on that? in a way that's also, financially is going to be the best for their business, and operationally will help them kind of offload a lot of headaches.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we get to vaccines, right? Um, Now, what happens with vaccines? I think this is probably the most interesting part of it all. Is one of the things that people don't realize is just how much of an investment vaccines are for a typical pediatric practice. It's usually salaries, vaccines, and then boom, like everything else is kind of a tiny line item. But like that is the um, uh, typical business kind of P&L, I'd say.
Right.
And one of the things um, that I realized is that, especially working with my uncle, he had all these investments in vaccines, was trying to manage all of these on a day-to-day basis, and unfortunately, it was just getting ahead of him, right? It wasn't something that was actually helping. It was actually financially hurting the practice, especially during the pandemic, because we had invested into vaccines and then people didn't necessarily come and get them. And it took a little bit of time for that to kind of pick back up and figure out what happened. And we found ourselves, thinking like, why is that, right? We're kind of talking about one of the most proven and important ROI positive uh, interventions that we could have in preventative care, right? And yet, it's kind of a thorn on the side of most pediatricians, and that became kind of the center point, the mission, the thing that we wanted to go fix, because um, it really didn't make sense. It didn't make logical sense, and it certainly didn't enable the pediatricians to do what they do best. So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of what
Mm-hmm.
brings me to here, I guess, but there's more to that as well.
Yeah, yeah, let's keep going down there because you said a bunch of really important stuff, and I think it's important, especially in the current time, right? Literally the current time we're in right now, where there's certain powers that be that are claiming pediatricians are making millions of dollars and all this bit don't have vaccines. It's right. A couple months ago, I had Sue Cressley on the show, who was president of the American Academy
Yeah.
of Pediatrics, and we talked broadly about everything that a pediatrician does, and we forget, from day one the infant is born to my 18-year-old still goes to a pediatrician, and so well care, sick care, diagnostics, vaccines, of course, an extremely important part of that. And you were talking about a little of that. Most of us don't understand sort of all the factors that go into what happens, the moment that vaccine is purchased, or even prior to that. And some of the things. What do we have? We have obviously the cost of acquiring the vaccines. We have the storage, and obviously this stuff, depending on cold chain and all that bit, can range from to many hundreds of dollars. Then you got the reimbursement issues. On top of that, you got all the overhead from staff to the storage equipment, and then of course, reimbursement and rejection and all the different types of value-added contracts and inventory management. There's a lot that goes into that, and I wanted to lay that out because I'd like you to talk a little bit more about sort of sort of these critical factors, and then a little bit how you thought through, because really Canid's a model is to say, hey, we'll take care of all that.
Yes.
You worry about these patients over here. That's great. But
Exactly.
walk us through some of this. Of those
Yeah.
factors, what are some of the more detrimental ones that we might be unaware of, and a little bit of how you set up, currently what
Sure.
Canid is in terms of this process.
Yeah. So when you give a vaccine, the part that's obviously most visible to the general public and to everybody is the nurse or doctor comes in, they give you the shot, maybe they distract the child and make them feel comfortable, maybe they explain to a concerned parent the the requirement for the vaccine as to why it's so important and what health benefits it's going to have, right? And it has, and that's obviously the part that everybody sees, right? But
Right.
in the background, there are a variety of also additional steps that have basically nothing to do with taking care of a kid necessarily. that are purely administrative, purely financial, purely operational, right? And I would separate them into three buckets, right? Bucket number one is inventory management and making sure that you have the right stock at the right time for the right patients. Then there's health record management, which is all the public health and documentation of the vaccines that you're giving and making sure that you're reporting them to all the right places, and then billing and making sure that the insurance company has the right information to reimburse you for the vaccines that you gave, right? And I'll start at the first one, right? Inventory management. When you're managing a fridge, well, first of all, you got to have the fridge itself. You have to be monitoring the temperature of the fridge and making sure that it's not actually getting out of range. You need to monitor your expiration dates on the stock that you have, and you need to monitor how much vaccine you're using. Then you need to take all of that information and based on expiration dates, vaccine usage, and any temperature issues, you need to then stock up, basically predict how much vaccine you might need, which may or may not happen. We see that sometimes it's easy to predict, sometimes it's pretty hard to predict. And one example of that was last season's RSV, where there was a lot of changes to how people were reacting to the RSV vaccine. And then you have to generate those orders. So now I'm talking to the Sanofis of the world, the pharmaceutical organizations that are basically selling you those vaccines. Or for half of the vaccines in the United States, they are actually going through the Vaccines for Children's program, which is a federally funded program that covers Medicaid and uninsured, right? And so you need, all these different products. You need to talk to all the different stakeholders to make sure that you get the right products at the right time, right? And then you receive those shipments, you put them into your inventory control system, and you also put them into your payable system to make sure that you're on top of the payments and whatnot. There's also a situation here where you need to negotiate for pricing. You need to think through the different contracting angles that might happen. Different seasons change the pricing. Pricing changes over time as we kind of evolve and new things come up. And all of those pieces are basically the inventory control part of it. That's part one, right? Part two is now you have to, you gave a vaccine, you need to then document it properly. And so the first step of all of that is checking to make sure that you're giving the right stock to the right child. So I mentioned earlier the Vaccines for Children's program. The Vaccines for Children's program requires that you give Vaccines for Children's vaccines to Vaccines for Children's eligible patients. So you need to make sure that you've checked their eligibility. Even if it's the same exact dose, you need to make sure that you know that they're a Medicaid patient or not. And as you can imagine, there's complications with that. It might be that this person, just got a job, just lost a job, maybe you haven't gotten the update, or there are, they're now qualifying in a different way. There's all sorts of different edge cases here that basically you need to verify for. And then you need to log the vaccination as you gave it to the child, right? You might also be checking, what's the path record? And let's make sure that the record is actually correct and everything's kind of aligned. And then if that person recently moved, which I'll get into, but if that person recently moved, you now have to check, okay, do I have the records in the past? Because they're not centralized. And so, and then once you gave that vaccine, you entered the log into your EHR or however you keep your records, you then have to submit that to the state registry. And every state, there's 60 state registries or more around the country. Each one of them is kind of its own independent entity. They don't necessarily talk to each other. I'm sitting here in New York City, and if you go to New York State, we would be under a different entities. So in the 5 boroughs, we're different than in the outskirts of the city, or Long Island, for example, right? And so I need to be thinking about that. Do I need to get new records? Do I need to look them up in the old registry? How do I submit that information? And that actually can change in many situations how that's all submitted as well. Software is completely different, and the process can be completely different. And then you have all of the kind of analytics of figuring out how your patient population is doing, which is, for example, like monitoring your vaccination rates, making sure that you're looking at who might have missed an appointment and see if you can follow up with them, making sure that you're not, you're following up with concerned parents who have like different schedules, or maybe they wanted to take it a little bit slower on the vaccines. There's this whole kind of process of getting people vaccinated in full that again has to be like it's almost like a public health analysis system. And finally, you need to make sure that all of your data is correct at all times, and you're regularly auditing yourself to make sure that there's nothing slipping the cracks, there's no medical mistakes, there's no sorts of issues around that as well. So that's step number 2. And I'm kind of running out of breath here, but step number 3 is now billing and making sure that we are talking to the right insurance companies, giving them the right information that they need. And then if they have any questions, if there's any reason why something was not able to get paid, we need to then figure out why and what we need to get done, right? That might mean they might mean looking at the explanation of benefits that we're receiving, looking at any sort of denials or questions that we might be receiving, why we're receiving them, usually with a lot of cryptic information that you can be on hold for hours sometimes, just like trying to figure out what exactly happened with this one claim. And then there's the whole angle of like making sure that you get paid more than what you paid for in terms of the vaccines, right? Well, sometimes and we see this all the time, right? We see sometimes, a vaccine costs $100 and the insurance paid us $95, and it's like, wait a second, that doesn't work out.
Right.
Or there's more egregious examples. Like we've been dealing with one where it's like the vaccine was costing us $45 and they were paying us $3.50. So there's like these sorts of issues that are happening regularly, and you need to be very aware of this, very eyes on top of it, very much like also, frankly, understanding your cash flows, because even if they pay you well, but they're paying you slow, that can be a problem, right? Because the costs are going out anyway. The reimbursements might take a while to come back. And so all of that process and for the maybe 30, 40 insurances that some clinics might be enrolled with is a whole cumbersome part. And I think the most important thing to talk about is I've probably gone through this whole process. Maybe it's taken me like 10 minutes of really describing every step, and there's a lot more detail, but none of it is medical. And that's the most important part, right? We're not actually going in there and saying, oh, these are the reasons why we make these medical decisions, and these are the ways in which, being on hold with a particular insurance company for an hour really helps patient care. I don't think there's an argument for that. So if we want to avoid that, then we need to kind of shield the medical doctor who's trained their whole lives and who's spent 20 years of their career taking care of patients from having to do this every day, right? And that's really been the thesis for Canid. Can we do this in a way that doesn't require the doctor to do that? And so the way that we've solved this problem is by effectively automating everything that I talked to, at least towards the clinic, And making it so that they give the doses, they let us know they give the doses, and that's all they got to do, right? And all the financial management, the inventory management, we're sending them vaccines at no cost to them, like basically in real time as they need them. All the record management in terms of communicating with the state and getting all the information and analyzing your population and blah, blah, blah. All the billing that we have to do with the insurance companies, all of that is kind of abstracted from their day to day so that they can spend more time with kids. That's been the general thesis.
And I'm very appreciative that you outlined all of that. Is again a very big iceberg that's under the water there that we don't see. We see the needle go in, and as you were mentioning, a couple seconds, but there's so much more behind the scenes. Now, that being said, at last look, there was somewhere. I mean, the number's like 60,000. I think 300 and some odd pediatricians alone in the United States. We got private practices, we got hospital clinics, we got larger multi-specialty clinics, and so forth. And talk a little bit about sort of, I mean, the typical sort of Canid process when I call you up, I'm like, all right, here I am, Ira Pastor, Pediatrician 101. I'm going to start at the Canid process, the Canid program. Talk a little bit about what goes on. I mean, do you have people coming into the office to to replenish the vaccine refrigerant? I mean, what happens in a typical event?
Yes.
Here I push the button and let's go.
So we try and make it that way. Of course, it's not really as simple as that. But the general idea is we will install a piece of software inside of your EMR that communicates directly with your EMR. And as they are giving vaccines, they can pull up that patient on our system, which again is linked to their EMR, scan a vaccine, and then go on with their day. So they're scanning what is on the barcode of the vaccine itself, which is the identifier into a patient's chart that is a part of their chart. Now, that's their day-to-day process. There obviously are some other things around it in terms of like making sure that everything is running smoothly, but I would say that 95% of the time, if people are using our system, they're doing that. They're scanning vaccines into our platform. And from there, because we have who the patient was, we have the information around the vaccine that was given, we can then track a digital inventory that will allow us to do all of our predictions and send you more vaccine. We use wholesalers to send you the vaccine. So all you need to do as a nurse is basically grab the box, put it in the fridge. You're good to go. You're ready to go. And then we'll use our technology to monitor everything that's going on inside the practice to effectively help you track all of this. So everything around software, everything around billing, everything around inventory management is kind of done for you. And we also will on a regular basis like go visit and help you count some inventory, make sure that everything was looking good. But that's something that is more part of the kind of cycle of making sure that everything's running smoothly, less so something that's needed necessarily on a day-to-day basis to operate. Because really the way that we want you to feel, I guess, is you receive the vaccine, you give it to kids, that's all the problem that you need to solve, right? And that's really the experience that we're going for, and hopefully the experience that our customers would say that we've accomplished.
And another interesting thing you mentioned, and again, I think this is a topic that we haven't touched as much on, but it's very important, especially from the perspective of the the public health role of vaccines are these state immunization registries that, basically consolidate the records from, into these databases, which are important because, we need to understand, whether it's pediatrician's office, pharmacies, wherever people are getting vaccinated. We have the histories, but at the same time, this very important, outbreak response. Unfortunately, we see outbreaks now all over the place from measles and this, that, and the other thing because of, issues, let's just say, that are occurring nowadays. But we really need to understand these in real time. And I think that's a very important piece of this as well that you, have integrated into the system. I wonder if you could just say a few words about it, just also introducing the principle of what the state immunization registries are there for and how all pediatricians,
Yeah.
clinicians have to feed into that as an important part of the
Yeah,
public health.
so the state immunization registries are there to track which kids are getting which vaccines at what time, and to help track state by state, or at least geography by geography, how things are operating from a public health standpoint and a vaccine standpoint, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, across the country, each state has their own registry. And as I mentioned to you earlier, there are some states that have multiple. And part of the infrastructure and the way it was developed is that there is very little way to communicate between one registry and another. And so what ultimately that means is that, if you're ever crossing borders, if you're ever going to a pediatrician somewhere else, you might now all of a sudden, and it might not even be that you're moving, but you're effectively, like, if I start going from a pediatrician in Brooklyn to a pediatrician in Long Island, I'm now under a different jurisdiction. And so there's challenges to that and how that actually will bring, or even cross the other bridge and go to New Jersey, right? So really, there's a number of different players here. And to your point, like, in theory, these state registries are super critical to prevention and to the management of how these vaccines are being used, and any issues that we're having and any potential outbreaks that we're seeing, right? But one of the things that we see, unfortunately, on a day-to-day basis is that, you're basically sending data that is not necessarily, I don't necessarily, like, it's not inaccurate, but there are errors with it, and there are mistakes with it, and there are challenges with it, and all sorts of ways in which there can be problems in that process, which effectively means that when it comes to analyzing public health, like, you just don't have the full picture, right? Yes, we can get a good chunk there, but talking a little bit about people moving state borders, talking a little bit about, names like mine that are very complicated, that sometimes create discrepancies with how the state is receiving your records and tying them to other records, right?
Yep.
And so at the end of the day, it's an outdated system. It's a system that doesn't take on all the edge cases, doesn't really think about like unique identifiers. It doesn't. It's not easy to transfer information from one state to the next. It's not easy to even have your own information. If I wanted to go find my vaccination records, sometimes it can be hard to find them and hard to understand them. And from a public health perspective, thankfully, I'm not the person looking at this data, but there certainly is a lot of challenges with actually taking this data and trying to use that to make better decisions, or make better, create better vaccination outcomes, or even develop vaccines when we want to. So that public health component is kind of garbage in, garbage out, right? It's, if you just don't have all the information that you need, it's going to be really hard to have a full picture of what's going on.
Well, again, obviously, you just announced a Series A raise of 10 million a couple of weeks ago, so which brings your total funding to 13 million to date. you think something like 120,000 patients connected to Canid so far. I think represent about 150 pediatricians in 12 states. Got 60,000 pediatricians out there to talk about sort of, what's going to be happening. I mean, because clearly you have a great service. Everything you laid out there and quite eloquently makes a lot of sense. Take us from 150 to the 60,000 or right? Milestones in
Well,
between
let's
there.
get
So
there. Let's get
yeah,
there.
yeah.
Well, so I think there's a couple kind of ways in which I think about this. On one side, we want to make sure that we can do what we do for more people, right?
Right.
We've been expanding across the United States. We're currently in 12 states, but we are working with new states, new registries, new legal infrastructure all over the country too. And we want to be able to accomplish that same exact experience as we move to uh, different contexts of pediatric practices. It might not, so we've also focused a lot on independent pediatrics on the smaller side. It's something that we hold very closely as someone who actually came from there. But there's so many contexts in which vaccines are given, right? That only accounts for a certain percentage. And so we want to be able to do that for more people, for more types of pediatricians, for different types of clinics as well as we look through kind of what's out there and what we can do. Now, what so in a way, we want to effectively get out there more, talk to more people, see what we can do, and help them achieve kind of this experience of just vaccinating and being done with it. Um, but the other thing that I think is really near and dear to my heart is this concept of supporting the pediatrician in terms of the business side of the pediatrics world, right? And there's a lot more to that. It's not just vaccines. Like I think vaccines
Sure.
is something that obviously is a big part. 20 to 30% of most pediatric practices are on the vaccine side, or the costs are coming from vaccines. But at the end of the day, there's scheduling, there's like a public analysis of your population. There's billing in other ways that are not just vaccine related. There's an innovation in EMRs too, and how those EMRs might interact with how we might be able to analyze the data inside the EMR
Mm-hmm.
for better ways. There's potential development opportunities in terms of like what we can support the industry to learn more about how kids are going through the process of pediatrics, potentially around autism, ADHD, like these common issues that are happening in the pediatrics world. But how can we approach those in a way that the current medical world is not necessarily approaching them, right? They might be
Right.
approaching them from the science perspective, from the public health perspective, but they might not be approaching it from the economist perspective and thinking through like how can we actually make this a sustainable part of the industry.
Yeah.
And so that's really what we want to be able to accomplish. There's a number of different things that we want to develop around that, and some of those are kind of in the process of becoming live and in the process of being tested right now.
Mm-hmm.
But there's certainly a lot more that we would like to do. And maybe a way to kind of explain this is if I used to work with my mom and my uncle, and I was the kind of other side of the brain that they needed to help manage their pediatric business. How can we scale that other side of the brain in a way that's like technology based, and frankly, also not necessarily private equity roll-ups, because that's the other way that it's happening right now, right?
Yeah.
Like today, okay, the way in which doctors offload their administrative work is by selling themselves to somebody who can centralize that, right? That's very common today. But is there a way where we can maintain the kind of independent thought process around that too, and still gain those benefits of giving that exciting opportunity to run a successful business that is also yours to the pediatrician.
Mhm. Yeah, it's quite interesting, some of these things that you're mentioning, and again, I think back to the conversation with Sue. Some of the things that the American Association of Pediatrics is focusing on specifically in terms of the collaborative electronic reporting and looking at effectiveness of vaccines in the office setting, the distributed clinical sort of study type models that they're thinking about. I think this fits in really nicely with all of that. So that's quite exciting. And then I guess this is the last thing, while we're on these lines, obviously, we got the 60,000 pediatricians, but hundreds of thousands of other practitioners out there that are administering all sorts of vaccines, not to mention the sort of the animal health world of vaccination as well. Thoughts on, when you're going to transition candidates, all that stuff, or, you got enough to focus on here at Pediatrics for the time being?
Yeah, I mean, I think pediatrics is pretty close to our like mission statement.
Sure.
But as you know, obviously, like vaccines are all over, and you mentioned vaccines coming out in the adult space, vaccines coming out in the in other spaces here, and even like some pretty novel ways in which we can use vaccines to prevent some really important diseases. But I right now we focus on pediatrics because pediatrics is kind of more it's like where it's also like the most um, standardized way of vaccinating today.
Yep.
And so it's where there's a lot of activity happening, especially on a per doctor basis. We see, a pediatrician who might be an adult pediatrician, or sorry, an adult doctor giving like one vaccine, two vaccines, three vaccines a week, but a pediatrician is giving 30 a day, right?
Yep.
So the standard for what we need to accomplish on the pediatric side is actually higher. We need to be able to make it more seamless, easier, more financially viable too. With another thing that happens in the pediatric space is that it's also one of the least compensated medical professions in the U.S. And so we need to make sure that it's not something that's necessarily hurting the bottom line of the practice, right? And so we are the focus on pediatrics also gives us a higher standard for what we need to accomplish. And in a way, once we've kind of hit that higher standard, we can more easily go to the adult space. We can more easily support other angles. And even today, we work with clinics who are 50% pediatrics, 50% adults, and of course we support them as well. It's not pediatrics exclusive, but if we can solve the problem for the most complicated denominator, I'd say, you can actually more easily support the rest of the industry, and that's what we're seeing. We're seeing adult doctors come to us. We're seeing new vaccines coming into play there. We're seeing now there's kind of also a movement towards direct primary care. We're also seeing some of these bigger hospital systems who might have this as maybe one of their last priorities, but really don't want to deal with it. Want to talk about how we might be able to support this. So really, there's that focus in like kind of the hardest problem has been our focus, and then how do we actually translate that to other parts of the industry as well?
Awesome. Makes sense. No, really great story. I again, when I first spent a little time researching what you were up to, I wanted to get up to speed, but it's again, a really impressive and elegant model that you've put together here to solve a problem that I guess many of us were just completely unaware of, and I'm glad you're doing it. Pedro, final message while we have you today. Anything I missed, and then any upcoming public-facing stuff, whether it's conferences, talks, investor conferences, whatever the case may be, that is on the horizon in terms of the next part of 2025 as we get into 2026, please.
Sure. So, one of the things that I think is also really important to think about is how the vaccination landscape is changing right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about this, we touched on this a little bit, but obviously this has become more and more part of the conversation. And one of the things that creates is uncertainty, right? Uncertainty, at the end of the day, is a big reason why Canid is so helpful to clinics, because when they don't work with a partner like Canid, they might have to take on that uncertainty themselves. New vaccines coming in, more questions, more issues, right? But also, like, should I buy this vaccine? Because, maybe people think that there's a problem with the measles vaccine or whatever. Should I even get it now? Because that's going to be a problem. Should I get less? There's uncertainty around it. There's uncertainty around reimbursement that we've seen around the ACIP kind of having changes, and how that has historically been the decider for whether an insurance company might reimburse or not, right?
Yep.
And so if that starts to change, and if that starts to operate in ways that are uncertain, whether
Right.
they operate in ways that are better or worse, the fact that they're unpredictable makes it hard for the doctors to actually understand, right? And that's really where I think we've been able to also fit in, because we're seeing all sorts of movement happening there, right? We're seeing all
Right.
sorts of uncertainty, and I think being able to say to our doctors that work with us, being able to say, hey, don't worry about the uncertainty. We'll take care of it. We can take the risk. It's okay. We have this model that will help us kind of improve things over time. And we'll also be the first to know, because we're seeing these problems happen over in this other clinic and over in this other clinic, right? You're not kind of in a silo anymore.
Right.
It creates this ability for us to kind of band together and help each other in a way, right? Through this uncertainty. And that's been really exciting to see, right? As much as, we can talk about how the changes that are happening are good, bad, whatever, like that's not really where we stand. But what we do stand for is this ability to kind of let the doctors do their thing, let the doctors be the experts, let the doctors focus on the things that they can, and also be able to make these adaptations as they need to, and as they learn more things, right? And being that partner that helps them, so that if they have to make changes, it's not going to bring down the business or hurt the
Right.
business in ways that are difficult. So I think that's been a really exciting part of this last few months, in terms of like being able to give to doctors comfort,
Right.
and repeatability, I guess, so that they can focus on what they do best. And I'm proud of being a part of that.
No, I think it's awesome what you're doing. I'm rooting you on. I'm going to continue to follow the growth of the company from where you're today to much bigger heights. But yeah, it's an awesome mission, and I really appreciate you sharing it with us. Again, a story we don't normally hear, that we should hear more about. So really, really impressive. Again, for everybody out there that is going to be listening to this episode of the show across the various podcast networks, or who will be watching on the YouTube channel, you've been spending time with Pedro Sanchez de Lozada, co-founder and CEO of Canid, doing really amazing things to manage the complexity of the entire vaccine operation process, so clinicians can maintain their focus on children. Pedro, again, I want to thank you, for taking the time out of the schedule to walk us through some rather complex themes. Thank you for what you do. And as we like to say on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow for many patients out there via the way you manage this complexity and uncertainty. A really, really great story.
Thank you so much, Ira. Thanks for having me.
Really great having you.